Well, as trade tensions with the U.S. drags on, China's domestic stock market has crashed and its currency devalued. But despite all of that, Ray Dalio, the founder and co-chair of Bridgewater Associates, says now is the time to invest in China. Krystal, Yahoo Finance, is joining us here in the studio. So, Krystal, tell us a little bit more about why Dalio is telling investors not to retreat.
Yeah, so Ray Dalio, the hedge fund titan, is extremely bullish on China, and at a time, especially timing now. Here are two reasons for this. He believes that China is comparable with the U.S. in a lot of technology areas, and actually in 10 to 15 years, China will have a bigger economy than the U.S., a bigger market, and with more population and more power. And the other reason is simply because Dalio believes that we should diversify our portfolios. You just can't ignore an economy that accounts for 22% of the world's whole total GDP. So he believes that if you want to get into the market now, it's sooner than later.
We've talked a lot about sentiment when we talk about the trade war and sort of the fears that, for example, maybe in China, consumers will stop buying American brands like Starbucks, McDonald's, and Nike. That hasn't reportedly happened much yet, but there are experts who say, oh, it's going to happen if this continues and drags on. It's interesting to hear Dalio do this because the reason I bring up sentiment, you wonder if big American names in finance, like a hedge fund guy like Dalio, the more they say things like this, are there people who are going to start to say, well, you know, why are you pushing China at a time like this when it should be America first? I mean, that's the whole point of Trump's kind of crusade here. This is the author of Principles. You start to wonder if those in finance, and there are many, I'm sorry to say, who are very pro-Trump, will start to criticize those who are saying, great time to invest in China.
Yeah, but we know that people in finance have a different worldview, say from politicians, that their word is to seeking higher returns for their investment. And they love looking at places that have higher risks probably, because that sometimes means more returns. Even in the example of China, Dalio was asked, but a lot of people saying there are a lot of regulatory risks in China. How do you respond to that? He said regulatory risks could be opportunities as well. And now, especially with all the headlines and the sentiment you mentioned, that the market is discounting that. And so if you get into the lower point, it may have a better chance to generate returns.
And I think he's also appealing to sophisticated global investors who understand that there's this trade dynamic going on with the U.S. and China, but at the same time, they want to make more money. Plus, I love what he was saying about betting on two horses, right? If it was an actual horse race, you can't bet on two horses. But here, it's like you can bet on both the U.S. and China so that no matter what happens, you're still making money.
Well, at the same time, though, there's kind of this question. I mean, there have been a lot of China bears out there as well, right? We had Kyle Bass on the show not so long ago. So, I mean, Krystal, would you say that Ray Dalio's bullishness on trying to buy the dip in China is kind of the minority view at the time being? Or do you think that actually there are a lot of other people out there that are saying, you know, got to invest in China right now?
Yeah, it assumes the China economy will come back. And that is a big assumption.
Really interesting. Yeah, if you see across the like American, hedge fund guys and the investors, there is a definitely different spectrum about their views on China. Of course, you see people who on the more bullish and also friendly side, people like Blackstone's founder Steve Schwarzman and also Ray Dalio. They're extremely bullish on China, and they're close to the Chinese government, and they have business ties there, and they even donate to the universities there. And then you have people more on the kind of central side, like Larry Fink, and like people who have some business presence in China, but whenever they talk about China, they try to strike a more balanced view.
Line, yeah.
And then you have people like Kyle Bass, basically, just stay away from China as soon as possible. I think it's good for investors to hear, voices on both sides and hear what are their reasons are. And if now as an investor you get option to get some exposure to the emerging market, which China is a big part in, do you want to make that decision now?
All right. Well, plenty of people on all the sides of the equation here. But Krystal, Yahoo Finance, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Krystal.